Hellblade 2 launches as the 23rd most played Xbox game, reporting by Paul Tassi. Senua's Saga Hellblade 2 launched last week to solid reviews from both fans and players. It's one of Xbox's higher profile exclusive releases this year, possibly the highest given that Call of Duty is cross-platform, but it may not have made much of a splash in terms of total players. And at Microsoft, every studio feels like it's being put on trial lately. Absolutely they are. We only have a limited array of metrics to go on in the current state of relatively non-transparent game performance, namely two when it comes to Xbox games. First, there's the top 50 most played Xbox games list that is updated every few days on a bit of a delay. It took a few days, but Hellblade 2 has debuted on the list in 23rd place. It originally showed up in 30th last night. This is despite its inclusion on Xbox Game Pass. So to be clear, this counts Xbox Game Pass. It's just who's playing it on the Xbox platform, which is crazy that it's not even that high. Like, of course, Fortnite, Call of Duty, Roblox, oh god, Rainbow Six, NBA, Minecraft, Apex, GTA 5. By the way, I'm just gonna ask for people to reference in chat. I tried playing Apex yesterday and it kept crashing on me. Is that a new thing or is it just me? Is it a me problem? I was trying to play Apex. I was like, I got the itch and I was like, oh, I'll re-download it, get back into it. And it keeps crashing randomly. I had to uninstall Valorant just to get it to boot because of the like anti-cheat in Valorant caused conflicting something or other in Apex. It was stupid. But anyway, let me know if I'm the only one, if you've also had problems with crashing. But they go through this, you know, so we got 5, 10, 15, 20, 21, 22, 23. Now, it is very niche. No one's doubting that. It is very niche. When you look at the other top performers, like most of these are very broad. Dead by Daylight, you could maybe say is niche, but it's also a huge game. Forza, you could be like, oh, well, it's a driving niche. Yeah, but it's also very wide appeal, I feel. Apex, Minecraft, NBA, like these are all very broad games in terms of popularity. So you could say that it's impressive. It's even this high, but still you would think and hope that for their big release for the first half of this year, it would be in the top like 5. You'd hope, but what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? The caveat here is that this list is based on hours played. Hellblade 2 is a relatively short game, about 6 to 8 hours for most players. Mine was like 5 hours and 28 minutes or 24 minutes, something like that. I genuinely am not sure how it could take you 8 hours to get through the game, unless you were playing it on like very hard and were not very good at combat, or if you were spending a ton of time in photo mode, for example, that could inflate it. But if you're just like sitting down and you play the game, I seriously don't know how it could take you 8 hours. I have no idea. It's really crazy. Still at launch, you might imagine those hours would add up to something a bit more significant given its place in Xbox's lineup and its availability on Game Pass. The second metric is that we have our Steam numbers, which are always somewhat controversial, but it's just data. In this case, it would indicate interest for the $50 game outside of Xbox ecosystem. Hellblade 2 peaked at 3982 players at launch. For context, the poorly received Redfall peaked at 6124. Problem is, it's also a Game Pass game, but so was Redfall. And I mean, I felt Redfall was already pretty niche, but I think with Redfall, there were a lot of people that were just curious about the dumpster fire and wanted to see it for themselves. With Hellblade 2, it's not even like bad or terrible. It's just disappointing. Like, it's just underwhelming. It doesn't do anything better than the first game except visuals. And that's it. Like, and my problem was like they pitched and described it as like, yeah, we rebuilt the combat system and everything. And then you play it and mechanically it's the same, if not like a little bit worse than the original game. So I don't know. It's just broadly frustrating. But with all that said, the key takeaway is that there do not seem to be all that many total players for Hellblade 2 at launch. However, we simply do not know at this point what Xbox considers to be a metric for success, especially with something like AA Game Pass games. But everyone is understandably on edge after the shutdown of Hi-Fi Rush's studio, a hugely acclaimed game that Microsoft widely bragged about as a success at the time. According to reports, Ninja Theory's next game is already greenlit, and they're at no danger of being shuttered like other studios. That's not official and was not claimed after these launch numbers, but it would be very unwise for Microsoft to cut and run from a talented studio if Hellblade 2 underperforms by internal metrics, as it was unwise to do so with Tango Gameworks. Yeah, the original Hellblade sold 1 million copies over its first year and ended up with 6 million players in 4 years. But now in the Game Pass era, sales are fractional and it's about total players or hours played, and only Microsoft has full access to that data. Given everything, however, even with close to identical reviews, Xbox's exclusivity and sequel arriving 7 years later seems to have limited Hellblade 2's reach. A great many people are certainly enjoying it, but it seems far fewer than the audience of the first game based on what we're seeing here. And that's the vibe I'm getting, is like, people love the original game because it was a really interesting concept and gimmick, and it also just, I'm gonna say it, I think appealing to PlayStation gamers. Like, this is the kind of game PlayStation gamers eat up. They love it. They love it. The super cinematic, narrative heavy stuff, they eat it up. And Xbox gamers, they just have never really gotten a lot of these games, so there's not that many people. Like, the people that would like these kinds of games went to PlayStation because that's where these games were, and then Xbox is bringing this out, and it's like, okay, so you got one, but the audience isn't there, you know? So it's just like, I think everybody could have seen this coming. Let's see, Brynworld. I think you cannot compare Redfall and Hellblade at all. Redfall had a pretty big high, was advertised everywhere, and it's multiplayer. It's kind of sad to say, but I feel like you maybe should compare it to games like Hi-Fi Rush, even though it was a shadow drop. I do think marketing wise, I recall the marketing for Redfall being much more aggressive. That game was everywhere. They were doing tons of preview events. They were sending it to YouTubers for preview coverage. Like, they were really trying to push that game. And yes, it was multiplayer, and I'm sure that's partly why, but still, like, it's, if you're comparing it to, like, okay, these both were games that were the big game for the first half of the year from Xbox, you would think that they would advertise them on similar scales and stuff, but it just seems like they did not really think that this was going to perform in a similar way, and so they just didn't bother. That's the vibe I think everybody got, was just that Xbox didn't feel like Hellblade 2 was ever going to be that huge, so they just didn't waste a lot of money trying to turn it into something huge. And I think, honestly, in hindsight, that was probably a safe call. You know, they didn't want to spend $100 million marketing this game out the ass and then have tons of people buy it and try it and realize it's 5 hours long and super niche. Instead, they're like, yeah, we'll make sure everybody's aware that it exists. And then if they are interested, they will buy it. And if they're not, they won't bother. And then they won't downvote us or anything. They won't review bomb us. So we'll call it good, you know? Luke, do you think they should have kept working on Bleeding Edge instead of this? My understanding is that Bleeding Edge, like, was a catastrophic failure. I mean, they literally abandoned it within 12 months. Like, they could have kept working on it, but I don't think anybody would have, like, I don't think anybody was playing it. Yeah, see? It's because, like, all-time peak 4 years ago, 1,400 people. Can you even boot it up? Does anyone like actually have the game? Is it even playable? Or did they shut down servers? Because this is, I mean, April 15th, they had 14 players. It's playable and on Game Pass. Woof, dude. I mean, for a year, the peak in the last year was 14 players through Steam. Granted, it's on Game Pass, so that's something, but this is why it was like, once we started looking back and we realized, oh, this was their last game. It wasn't Hellblade 1. This was their last game. So Hellblade 2 is like the game after Suicide Squad for Rocksteady. It's like the game that the live service crew made. And on one hand, that makes you feel better because it's like, okay, they abandoned this pretty much like early to mid 2021. I believe it's January of 21, they officially ended support. So if you say that they then had the entire team move over to Hellblade 2 at that point, and they entered like full production, say middle of 2021, then they spent basically, what, 2.5, 3 years making Hellblade 2. And then you're like, okay, that makes sense why it's the size it is. Much better than 7 years, and this is all we got for it. But it doesn't really excuse it. It's just, woof. Yeah, I get the vibe again that Bleeding Edge was something they were working on when they sold to Xbox so that they could be like, yeah, see, we're going to make a live service game and make tons of money. It's like basically Overwatch, but it's bleeding and it's edgy. And then they were bought for 185 something million dollars. This was a catastrophic flop. This did not make a penny. And so then they were like, okay, well, we'll make Hellblade 2. And they announced that and put that out. And it just seems like they're playing the long game with Ninja Theory. And I'm sure that given enough time and money and resources, they could build out a Naughty Dog level in terms of production value game, but they're going to need a lot more than 2.5, 3 years. Yeah. Yeah, they're a small game of 80 people. Absolutely. No, nobody's questioning that. Pretty sure I mentioned it in my review that it's only 80 people, but small studios do not charge small studio dollars. Like they're charging the same amount of money, you know? He took my thing. Red flag.